Hello, my name is Father Tighe, and this is our 138th segment of our Journey of Faith in the Light of the Cross, in which we continue in the Acts of the Apostles. And we go to our screen and we see the theme. It was Israelites with Levitical attitudes who allowed God to redeem their cross of abandonment, who led Peter and the church out of the suffocating domesticity of Jerusalem into the wilderness of the universal world. We go to our next screen and we read, Luke is usually described as the evangelist to the poor and the oppressed. But more accurately, Luke emphasizes Jesus' evangelization of Israelites cursed by law to feel ashamed for burdening Israel with their needs. Luke used the experience of desperately poor Levites, given temple work as porters and janitors and other menial work that reduced their status. Then, as they felt down, the high priest made them feel like burdens, and burdens is a shame, who depleted their temple money with their needs. So the high priest thought they were only depleting the money from the temple, and that made the Levites feel awful. This connects us to Stephen and the other deacons. We go on to our next screen. Now recall Acts 6:7. This is very important that these two verses go together. A great number of priests are Levites. There were high priests in Jerusalem who were obnoxious, but the rural priests like John the Baptist, Father Zechariah, were very humble, and they were Levites. A great number of priests, Levites, became obedient to the faith. And in the next line it says, Stephen worked great signs and wonders for the people. These two go together. They were from priestly families. They were Levites. So members of the Freedmen's Synagogue from Cyrene, Alexandria, and Cilicia came to debate Stephen. So fellow Levites came to debate Stephen. Scholars say the Freedmen's Synagogue, this is very important, descended from 10,000 slaves deported by Pompey in 63 BC. And this is less than 100 years later, so a lot of them, their grandfathers, were deported. Their freed descendants, Stephen and Philip's generation, came to visit Jerusalem. Now we have to go back and say what happened in 63 BC. We go to our next screen. Two Maccabee brothers, they're called Hasmoneans, competed to be high priest. Both brothers invited Pompey's support in 63 BC. So they went out of the way to get Pompey on their side, which of course led to Roman control of Israel. They were so foolish it was unbelievable. Pompey sided with John Hyrcanus against his brother Aristobulus, who already was acting as high priest. When Pompey sided with John Hyrcanus, his brother Aristobulus decided to fight. Pompey defeated him and reduced 10,000 Levites working in the temple to slaves and shipped them out to the Roman Empire, leaving deserted wives and children. But Aristobulus, the fool who caused all this, bribed his way to freedom. So how did they feel? We go on to our next screen. Again, they feel abandoned and rejected by their leadership. We need to recall information about Levites. Levites and priests, the rural priests, were not able to own land in Israel, so they stayed in cities, or they left Israel and lived in the diaspora. Their literary skills as Bible students helped them in their desperation to earn a living. Over time, they made money by dealing with Gentiles, but only by learning the scorned Gentile languages. They were scorned and shamed for dealing with Gentiles as, and this is very important, Levi Matthew. Remember, Matthew is called Levi in Mark's gospel. That means he's a Levite, the tax collector. He says, you abandon me, you leave me no way to make a living, I'll become a tax collector for the Romans. Levites often felt more respected and valued by Gentiles than Sadducees, their fellow priests, or the Pharisees, who were Judeans. We go on to the next screen. Many of Pompey's 10,000 slaves were valued more by slave masters. They said, what is this experience? We get betrayed by our leaders, we go out as slaves, and we get more respect from the slave masters than the high priest, especially if they knew Greek, the language of commerce, which the Judeans hated and the Pharisees. So Levites learned Greek to make a living and became teachers, scribes, lawyers, doctors, carpenters, like Joseph, tailors, and jewelers. All the professions go back to the priesthood. Even carpentry and jewelry, they made vessels for the temple. Okay? Now, in time, these slaves were freed, but they did not return to live in Israel. But many did visit Jerusalem and the freedmen's synagogue, but with defiant and angry feelings for what had happened to them. We go on to our next screen. Stephen and the 6 deacons were an elite few who deeply identified with widows, orphans, and aliens, especially thinking of the family left behind by their grandfathers. In the light of the cross, they understood redemption and Catholic universality almost immediately, even before the apostles. They understood because the second law, Deuteronomy, constantly reminded Levites of the injustices of original sin, which they were the prime victims. We go on to our next screen. Philo, from a priestly family in Alexandria, gave a good example of diaspora Levite feelings. Philo defied the Pharisees in Jerusalem, and he refused to learn the Hebrew language, but he also defied Caligula, saying he'd die an Israelite, not a Judean, rather than bow to his image. We see Philo's defiance and willingness to die in Stephen's defiant and eloquent speech. You said, where did that man get that great defiance and strength and eloquence? It was from this Levitical attitude. This divine spirit disposed them to God's grace, and Peter's evangelizing in chapters 1 to 5. We go on to our next screen. Before Paul converted, his feelings made him an angry crazy who cheered at Stephen's death. But these same feelings disposed him to the cross, and his deep understanding of the faith. By his conversion, Paul finally found sanity. We hope we now better understand why Luke went back into the first 13 years of the church in chapters 1 to 12 of the Acts of the Apostles, and we thank you for struggling with us to get through these segments. We thank you so much as we end chapter 23. Again, I thank so much Jason Brown and Martha Velez for the great work they do in helping me produce these segments. We hope you continue as we produce more segments in the future. Thank you so much for journeying with us.
To heal the sin-sick soul. If you can't preach like Peter, if you can't pray like Paul, just tell the love of Jesus and say he died for all. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. If you can't preach like Peter, if you can't pray like Paul, just tell the love of Jesus and say he died for all. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal a sin-sick soul.